Hi, Will. Thanks for reaching out to me, and I hope you're staying safe during this difficult time. And I appreciate you reaching out to me for help with your golf game. So I see some pretty significant things in your swing that need to be addressed, and I think those things can be addressed fairly easily. So I want to first talk a little bit foundationally about how you're setting up and what I'd like to see changed here. The first thing I would call to your attention is the fact that as you set up, your spine tends to be leaning a little bit towards the target, and that would be a high right shoulder, and that would be the torso sort of tilting and leaning over in this direction. And I kind of understand why you're doing that, and I'll get into that a little bit later into this lesson, but that's something that I'd want to change right away. So just in your setup here from this face-on view, I'd like to see your left foot flared a little bit more in this direction, and I would be okay with where you have the right foot. And then number two, I would like to see your spine tilting about 5 to 10 degrees. If that's, let's see, if that's straight up and down 90 right there, I'd like to see it somewhere in about the 5 degree tilted to the away from the target mark. So somewhere about that line right there, and you'll see that from Rory over here. So there's 90, and that's about where his spine is right there. So I want you to kind of mimic and model a little bit of what you see Rory doing over here on the right. And so how he's doing that is just basically allowing some right lateral bend of the torso. If you think about it, our right hand is lower down on the grip than our left, so that should be pulling our right shoulder down, and we should be flexing our torso laterally in this ballpark. So let's create a little bit of tilt in your setup. Let's get your left foot a little bit more flared, and I think we're in a decent starting position there. So because you have this poor setup, your first move off the ball is to start bending and flexing your right knee. And you can see that move right there. It's a little trigger to start your swing where you go into excessive kind of flexion in your right knee. And what happens is that you continue to add flexion and turn your hips with a bent right knee. And the problem with this is you overturn your hips, you don't get off your left side, and you stay very much stacked up on your left side at the top of the backswing. And this is the major issue that I see in your swing, and the biggest challenge that we face trying to fix this. So, because you keep your right knee flexed far too long in your backswing, it causes your hips to turn very, very level, and they tend to over rotate. And as they turn level and over rotate, you're very much stacked up over here on the left side. You can see how much pressure you've got pushing into the ground there. And then, here's just kind of a quick visual of what I'm talking about. So if I draw just a quick line from the outside part of your ankle up to your left hip, and then I do the same for Rory, you're going to see a significant difference. And I'm just going to kind of stop at left arm parallel to the ground. You can see how you didn't move away from that line at all. Your right knee flexed, your hips turned, but your pelvis didn't have any sway whatsoever in this direction, which means you didn't load the pressure into your right foot or your right heel. And if you watch Rory, on the other hand, you're going to see a significant kind of pressure shift and load into the right side. Now, his hips aren't turning anywhere near as much as yours are, but his shoulders are turning more than yours are. So he's getting a little bit bigger stretch there, which is a very, very powerful move. So what you do see is Rory's right knee lengthening out just a little bit, extending a little bit, and you see him moving pressure into this right foot, in kind of a solid base there. Now, it's at this point in the swing where you'd start to see Rory kind of continuing rotation and then starting to move back toward that line late in transition. Okay, So that's kind of what we want to do. We want to load pressure early to the right, and then at about left arm parallel, we want to continue the rotation of our body and start allowing that pressure to flow back to the left foot like you see there. Now, if we look at you over here on the right, we're just going to see you're stacked up completely on your left side. And then when you start to transition, because your right leg was so flexed in the backswing, there's so much bend here, and you turn so level that you're stuck. You're stuck on your right side. So the only way to get off of your right side is to start extending and pushing off of your right leg. So watch how your right leg straightens. And when that happens, you're basically pushing your body's centers. And when I say centers, I'm talking about the center of the pelvis and the center of the torso. So I would say right here and right here. Now, where those two centers are relative to that golf ball are largely going to determine our swing geometry. Whether we're coming from the inside, shallow to the ball, whether we're coming steep, whether we're coming over the top to the left, those swing centers are very, very critical in their positioning relative to that golf ball in determining those things. So again, here's the flexed right knee and the over rotation of the hips stacked up on the left side. And then it gets worse when we straighten the right leg and push ourselves forward. Now, I haven't seen many golfers do this as significant as you are. So if I draw a circle on your head, and then if we find the center of that circle and just draw a 90-degree line down, your head is positioned in front of the golf ball. And I could count on one hand how many players I've seen with their head in front of the golf ball at this point. And if you look at Rory over here on the right, you notice that the lower body moves left, but the head pretty much stays where it's at or even moves back. And here's Rory's head. Actually, I'm going to draw a little better circle than that. Probably a little more accurate there. So find the center of that, 90 degrees down. You can see Rory's head is well behind the ball. And that's what allows him to come shallow and from the inside. And you can see that the torso has way more right bend to it. And then the bad thing is you're still in the phase of pushing off your right side, because if we go from here to impact, you can see your head continues to move forward. Okay, whereas if we look at Rory, we see his head is in the process of moving backwards. His head is staying more and more and more and more behind it. Okay, now here's the problem. As you push off this right side and you thrust out of the ground and you start moving these swing centers forward, you are moving yourself in front of the golf ball, which means your attack angle is going to be very steep and you're going to hit the ball very low unless you make a compensation. And that compensation for you comes in the form of releasing your wrist angles prematurely. So if we look at this angle between the left arm and the shaft, and you're unloading this thing and uncocking it at a very, very rapid rate here, and you're having to do so to get loft on the club. You know, you're trying to throw this thing out and line it up to be able to get some kind of loft on the club because your swing centers are so far in front of the golf ball. Whereas with Rory over here, staying behind it, the right shoulder is closer to the ground, which means if he does the same move that you do, which is uncock these wrist angles, well, he's going to hit the ground way behind the ball. So because his upper center is positioned further behind the ball, it allows him to stay behind it and deliver some shaft lean at impact, which is where all that compression and ball speed, comes from. So in your case, you don't have that option. You've got to line it up and kind of throw it past you in an effort to get any amount of loft and get this ball up in the air. So here's how we fix it. So number one, we fix the setup like we talked about. We're going to get in there and we're going to flare this lead foot. and we're going to create about 5 degrees that are straight up and down of axis tilt. Whoa, I went way too much. So about 85 is what I'm looking for there. Perfect. Okay. So I would want your head to be positioned in that circle, having a little bit of tilt to that spine and getting that right hand's lower on the grip, so that right shoulder is going to be lower. Perfect. Now, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to put a stick in the ground that is outside your right ankle, straight up and down to about 90 degrees. Okay? And it should be a little bit back behind you, but a little bit behind your right heel so it doesn't get in the way when we're hitting a golf ball. Okay? And I want it there basically just for feel and for like a physical frame of reference. Because what I want you to do is I want you to feel like in the beginning of your backswing, you're going to allow your right hip to move towards the alignment rod that's in the ground, and then make it turn inside the alignment rod, and then it can start to work back toward the target. Okay? So in this first phase, so from address to basically left arm parallel, that's when we would be closing the gap between our right hip and that alignment rod. And I want you to allow that pelvis to kind of sway. And what you're going to do is you're going to feel your trail leg kind of lengthen out, and you're going to feel your hips start to incline. You're going to start to feel your right hip is pretty much well higher than your left, and there's some angle there. There's some tilt to that. And again, just a good look at what that looks like. You can see how Rory's right hip is higher than his left at this moment. Don't need to turn the hips a whole lot. You've got massive amounts of hip rotation. So you could stand to turn the hips a little bit less, create a little bit more sway in the backswing. Okay? Again, we're going to move pressure into the ground, into that right foot early. We're not going to roll to the outside part of the foot. We're going to keep it on the instep. Pressure into the right side. Nearing this part of the backswing is when we would continue to turn and allow everything to kind of move back toward the left. Okay? Some step drills would help with this to get everything to kind of flow from left to right. There's a lot of different drills you can do. And honestly, there's a couple other things in your swing that I would want to clean up, but I don't want to give you too much all at once. I want to start right here. Let's fix this setup. Let's fix this pressure shift into the right side. Let's learn to create a little bit of inclination of that pelvis. And then your downswing feel is one of the things you can do at home is I want you to stand in a door frame. And so let's say this is the door frame right here. I want you to put your left ear on the inside part of the door frame, and I want you to go to the top of the backswing, and then when you come down and simulate impact, your face is going to be touching the inside part of that door frame, so you're going to get a feel of what it feels like to keep your head back as your hips move forward and simulate impact. So like your head wouldn't be able to move through the door frame like that. So what we're going to see at that point is a lot more sort of right bend of the torso with the head staying back here somewhere.